Hello everyone, I am Biren Ghosh. I have been an unwavering fan and a veteran at the CMC for many years now. The magical milieu of CMC that burgeons with creative minds and insightful ideas as industry veterans and professionals and artists and children come together to unfold the stories of tomorrow has always been mesmerizing for me. And the keynotes are especially path-breaking. I have chosen to capture Dylan Collins' 2014 keynote on the inflection points in the kids' media space. This was a chronicle of a tale foretold. One of the CMC hallmarks is to trudge down to the crucible at the end of a day. We were then filled with anticipation as we wend our way uphill to the foyer for a quick couple of G&Ts that set us up nicely for this talk. But nothing prepares you for Dylan. He's this extraordinary Irish technology guru who knows how to throw code at media software, issues that he finds solutions for. And these become the fuel for his startups. His ideas are so potent that he invariably finds millions of dollars thrown at them, only ultimately to become a part of some large organization, some Goliath, leaving this David, codenamed Dylan, to go on to his next conquest. I will play some excerpts from this incredible keynote that left us thinking about what was breaking news and awesome in entertainment from someone who is the CEO of Super Awesome.
I suppose I start with something of a complaint. So Michael Acton Smith, who I love and who's amazing, has been described in the media as being the Willy Wonka of games and the Willy Wonka of technology, and I'm super envious of that. When I was described in the email that went out 2 or 3 days ago, I was described as the Don Draper of kids. Also, to be fair, also the Willy Wonka of kids. And then also the Pied Piper of kids. That on the left is for DC Comics fans. That's the Pied Piper from the Batman comics. It is true that I do wear a number of hats. I haven't shown this email to my mother yet because I think it's going to confuse her greatly about what it is I actually do. I have promised her over the years that I will eventually get a proper job.
From the get-go, you know that this is a serious tale out of the ordinary personality with a wacky sense of humor, using all of his playful banter to deliver nuggets that were and are the cutting edge of this industry's most important solutions. Let's see how his journey started.
And we started our first company, a company called Demonware, top left logo, when we were still in university in Trinity College in Dublin. And we started it above a tattoo parlour on a small street in North Dublin. It was literally the worst place to put anything. The temptation to get terrible tattoos every evening was absolutely immense. Over time, believe it or not, that company became one of the biggest multiplayer technology companies in the world. So we built the tech that connected people together. So when you were playing on an Xbox or on a PlayStation or on a PC or something like that, it was actually our tech that was connecting people from around the world. And you know, we started that company, and our very first game, our very first client, they had 100 people in the game playing together online. And we thought it was just amazing. You know, now it's been used by, I think, 400 or 500 million players around the world. A lot of you probably won't remember this, but gaming at that point, the video games industry was considered niche, it was considered small. Nobody thought it was going to become one of the most important entertainment industries in the world, and it did. You know, it became literally the biggest entertainment sector in the world. I mean, and you got to understand, I grew up in a small village in the south of Ireland, and my parents, for years, were embarrassed to tell the neighbours what I actually did. So, Jesus, don't tell them he works in video games. Christ, no. You know, tell them he's an accountant or something like that. I see, the kids industry today from all of the angles, from content, from technology, from marketing, from media, to be at this inflection point, that bit in the middle. And inflection points are interesting, because you can go up or you can go down, but usually something happens. And it reminds me very much of the video games industry, 10 years ago. And I think, as an industry, there are decisions that we have to make. There are things that we really have to think about to figure out whether we're going up that curve or down that curve over the next 3 or 4 or 5 years.
This segment helps set the stage by addressing the preconceived stereotypes and legacy mindsets prevalent in media, advertising, and gaming, and sets us up with an amazing story of how to roll the ball down the alley of change, interpreting what's cool and unavailable while still at university. Dylan pioneered the ability for several folks to be able to play games remotely and concurrently. Today, this seems like hygiene, a simple idea that has become even more potent in the abnormality of the 2021 pandemic. Dylan has held on to this creative intelligence and insightful nature, realizing that video games would create a wave that would grow exponentially, and he has learned to serve these waves to fame and fortune. In hindsight, all innovations seem really simple, but the art of the start is as much about timing as it is about brilliance. His story is an inspiring prescription that messages those in our creative technology industry to break the rules with humility and an intellectual honesty, and develop this instinct to recognize when you have something whose time has come.
I think at the start we probably pitched something close to about 17 people, and they mostly turned us down. So in the end, I actually funded the thing myself. And we brought on board some angel investors last year after they were seeing how quickly we were growing. Very insightful angel investors. But the interesting point about all that is that fundamentally, to the outside world, to investors, to venture capitalists, they see the kids industry as being fundamentally very, very difficult to invest in. I'm just going to say that again. Everyone in this room represents, what you create, what you build. We literally and figuratively represent the future of society. It's a pretty important place to be. It's a pretty important position to hold. And yet most investors, most sophisticated, knowledgeable, experienced investors think that this is a tough space to invest in. Today we're fortunate enough that not every investor says no to us, and we actually have some people knocking on our door at the moment. But it's a lesson that, you're wrong until everyone decides that you're right.
As the spellbound audience sunk deeper into their seats, you could see that they were already launched into a magical ride in what was a veritable masterclass by a consummate storyteller, making us believe that all of his amazing powers were just a recipe concocted with all the things we already have in our own bag of tricks. So obvious, yet so relatable, and uniquely strung together. At the time of this talk at Sheffield, the UK market was growing by tens of thousands of kids going online for the first time ever, every day through that year. The rate of that growth multiplied 7 or 8 times in just the next few years. And over 30% of new internet users annually were kids. That number itself grew to over 40%. And ironically, the data for such information came from PwC Kids Digital Media Reports, which partnered, guess who? Dylan's Super Awesome. Dylan was truly straddling a niche that he had invented. Safe spaces that enabled scale in technology-enabled content for kids. And this space became the meeting point for consumers, content creators, and brands alike.
This is Santa Clara Valley, which is essentially the epicenter of Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley began in roughly 1971. decades ago at this stage, almost 50 years in fact. And it today has become the center of the internet primarily because it's got one of the most hyper-developed ecosystems on the planet. Ecosystems are incredibly powerful things. They are the reasons, they're, I think, the driving reason why the internet guys almost always seem to arrive in any industry and spoil the party for anyone. Someone shouted about YouTube earlier. This is a quote that the CEO of Fullscreen, who was a rival to Maker Studios, came out with during the week. I thought it was quite brilliant. And we're seeing the same thing happen, I think, with TV content and YouTube. The internet guys are coming in, and once again, they're messing up all the furniture. But it's really happening. There's a reason that Disney paid $450 million for Maker Studios, a company that was completely out of money, right? Maker Studios was going to hit the wall. Disney came and paid almost $500 million for it, just to get their hands on it. And I think, in terms of getting there, as an industry, we've got to think about making more acquisitions. We need to think about buying more companies to help us get to this place. Not for any type of moral reason or because we think we need to help people out, because it is by far the most efficient way to evolve and grow. These companies in Silicon Valley realize that startups, and a lot of you in the audience are startups. Startups are really an outsourced R&D function for these big companies. Right? And there's two big reasons for that. And anyone who works in a big company will recognize this immediately. One, big companies need digital DNA. It's a desperately, desperately underestimated element of actually making digital products. I've seen huge amounts of companies experiment and try and build it internally. Sometimes it works, but you know what? A lot of the time, it really, really doesn't. The second reason is that to get to success in the digital space, you need a process of repeated and efficient failures. You need to be able to fail fast. And in the digital kid space, I think that's true more than ever. We need to fail spectacularly. We need to fail really, really hard. We've got to fail in both brilliant and sublime ways, and we've got to fail enough so that we can actually find the things that are absolutely going to work in this particular space. And as an industry, we need to figure out how to create something that can, if not replicate what Silicon Valley is, then certainly get to that point where we can create amazing companies. We need to create digital infrastructure of the children. We need to create a digital infrastructure for the children. If we leave it too long, that same digital infrastructure will probably be created by the children. And if I was to make one suggestion about your time at the Children's Media Conference, I would say for the big companies, think about who are the interesting little companies, who can really bring value to you.
Dylan was showing us the brushstrokes and taking us behind the scenes as he painted this fantastic picture of the future of kids media. He could see how this was disruptive. He could see how his startup was a part of the startup world where small folks like his company could take bold strides and prove new models. He knew that as these startups built traction and momentum and proved a concept, that they would see the possibility to be invested into by more risk-averse, large organizations who would need these new ideas to bolster their own offerings in the new digital. I am convinced that experimentation in the kid space, Dylan thought, needed its own garden patch in the global valley of Silicon. He sounded a clarion call that funds and media giants would be hungry to seek out innovation where their teams could not innovate fast enough to grow these organically. His predictions have come true. In 2020, about 4 years after this keynote, Epic Games could see the enormous value of his proposition and bought out Super Awesome. A victory for Dylan and for the safe space for kids. Let's hear a little bit as to what this Nostradamus said all those years ago.
Today, as much as I beat up the games industry, kids under the age of 16 represent about 50% of the total revenue that's there. It is absolutely huge. Everyone in this room obviously has a kids strategy. However, not every big company has a kids strategy. And I think this generation is going to change that. And one of the reasons I see this inflection point is because more and more companies are realizing that there's something going on here. I would sum it up in one line. Kids are the new mobile. This generation of kids is honestly going to reshape the internet, technology, and everything consumer in the same way that mobile and tablet did. Kids, bear in mind, are the reason that Facebook spent $1 billion to buy Instagram. Kids are the reason that Mark Zuckerberg spent $17 billion to acquire WhatsApp. You know, Facebook today is rapidly becoming a platform for parents, and I think more and more people know that. And it's going to be a very lucrative thing in and of its own right.
The kids industry is all about hard work. There are many super creative folk. I meet several of them at CMC's annual Buyer-Seller International Exchange. This is a melting pot where I have been pitched great concepts that are clever and insightful and really get the imagination going. But my age group is not the target audience that will watch these shows. Commissioners and buyers have shown us, including at the CMC conference, how we need to think about a pitch, its idea, story, sensibility, and visual treatment, which needs to shoot an arrow into the hearts of the kids in that target group. My filter is not in the head, it's in the heart. The head comes later when we talk about how to develop and produce and distribute the show with the collective intelligence of the various constituents, while ensuring as much as possible not to destroy the soul and the artistic integrity as it goes through its maternity prior to its release. Dylan shows that understanding of this subterranean space that resides below the adult age level. It is one where we need to develop the ability to purge all the elements that create noise and get rid of anything that could even remotely seem incongruous, even dangerous to kids today. He also reflects that the same age set is constantly evolving emotionally in what they want to do with this content, how they want to choose what they see, and hopefully how they want to interact with it. This is what Super Awesome had set out as its mission to protect.
For the first time in our history as a society, I think, we are being presented with a generation of kids who are capable of exceeding our abilities while they are still kids. I'm not sure when this has happened before, but it is definitely happening. And if you think I'm just sort of, picking extreme cases, I'm really not. Here's some data that we ran a couple of months back, where we asked kids about what they were doing technically. And about 26% of them, about a quarter of kids, claim to have written some kind of code. Be that HTML, HTML5, something like Scratch. It's pretty amazing. About a third of them have used some sort of graphical editing tool. And this is a collection of kids under the age of 14. It was a sample, I think, of about 1,000. So there's a real change that's going on here. The other thing which kind of backs up this point, that kids are becoming much more creators and consumers than ever before, the global toy industry, which I love, sadly is in decline by about 1.5% to 2% every year, is declining except for the construction category. This ties into Minecraft. The reason that Minecraft exploded was because it allowed kids to be able to create. It gave them the tools. It actually empowered them. We've got new frameworks for these kids. This is the generation who can access anything right now. And this isn't even the generation that's been raised by tablets. Wait till we see what they do. And we are, as a society, we are woefully, embarrassingly underprepared for this generation, I really think. And you might all say, oh, well, it's kids. How are they going to really impact everything? Let me give you an analogy. This, admittedly, it's a slightly left field analogy. As some of you who know me will know, I'm a little bit into rap music. And by little, I mean a lot. In the early 90s and late 80s, rap was still considered a niche music, right? It was still not very white. It was still considered pretty violent, right? That's NWA, who came from Compton, at the time a super tough place, right in LA. Chap on the right, far right of that lineup, you'll know Ice Cube. Dr. Dre, most of you will know as well. No one thought rap was going to go mainstream. No one thought rap was going to shape the world and entertainment, culture, and society the way it did. Dr. Dre is now on the executive team in Apple. This was the transition. This took what, about 20, 25 years? Things can happen and shape our culture, beyond anything that we can really, really predict. And you look at this trend that's happening with kids, and you honestly think that this trend is going to do anything other than massively accelerate. Think about classrooms and think about teachers. For a lot of you, and I'm sure some of you are teachers here, you think about the imbalance that exists in the classroom today between some teachers and students when it comes to talking about anything technical, programming, computer science, anything around that. Imagine what that is going to be like in 5 years' time, the new generation of kids, right? Probably going to be the same teachers, though. How are we going to deal with that? Think how sophisticated they're going to be. How do we even think about that? So, this is why I believe that as an industry, we are at absolutely an inflection point. And we can go up the curve, or we can go down the curve. I truly believe, I am incredibly excited to be in this industry, and I feel privileged to be here with you all. Because this is a sector, this is an industry, this is a group of people, of humans, that is going to become one of the most pivotal and one of the most influential over the next decades. And I think, all of us here, we can choose to be leaders, we can choose to be followers in this. We can choose to be spectators, or we can choose to get involved. I know which choice I've made. Thank you all very much for listening. It's been very kind.
As mediums mature, they become more specific and create more genres that serve distinct and discrete technologies, types of content, and audiences. Traditional TV has shown that while theatrical movies need to have a more universal, wider appeal, television, on the other hand, has moved from being general entertainment or general channels to more specific genres like news and sports and music and so on. And over time, this has led to further niches with channels for cooking and gardening and spiritual and shopping and so on. And kids' channels have for many years now been even more specific, with preschool, 6 to 9, tweens, teens, youth, and so on. The internet is, however, a far more easy space to create this variety of targeted offerings. It has allowed itself to become a delivery channel without all the paraphernalia and the infrastructure of cable and satellite TV that wired up the world. It, however, comes with its own inherent risks of access, and therefore putting the guardrails in place for what kids should be able to see when left to their own devices, pun intended, was the opportunity that Dylan saw and has so amazingly taken that to a scale where kids now have this data lake of content from which they could pick and choose something in a relatively safe harbor. Keynotes are balloon rides that take us gently over magical terrain. This was a wonderful flight that we experienced with Captain Dylan at the wheel, a trip to remember.